I am joined this week by Alan Shillitoe coming to us from the UK. Welcome, Alan.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
So we spoke about 9 months ago. It was actually the first one of these that I recorded, and I was an amateur and it didn't go through all the way. So I'm really glad to be talking with you again.
It's good. Yes, I'm glad to have a second bite of the cherry, definitely.
So we started talking on bridge winners after I started posting some of my leveling up stuff at the beginning of the year, and it seemed to hit a nerve, and you were interested in it. Yeah, why don't you tell us what caught your eye about that?
I'm just fascinated by the whole piece, really. Being a junior coach, anything around improvement, what methods people are using, how they train, all that kind of stuff. You're always looking for something to give yourself, an extra tool in your kit and so on. But also, I'm quite interested in discussion from another standpoint, which was about 10 years ago, in fact, even longer than that now, I'd been doing a degree in sports science just because I'm a complete sports nut, basically, and just wanted to learn more about the subject. And I was finding loads of stuff that I thought was relevant across a whole variety of areas to the world of bridge and coaching that I didn't think anyone had picked up on yet. I thought the bridge was really quite backwards and its approach to so many areas, and it still is. I think there are big gains to be made using a lot of the techniques there.
Let's start at the beginning. Take us back. How did you learn bridge?
So me, it was almost by accident, actually. I was about 14, 15 years old. I wandered into my school library and there happened to be a book on the shelf in the games section called How to Play Bridge by Philip Alder. In fact, I bought a cheap secondhand copy of it just to remind myself of where it began. And I read it and I was kind of fascinated. And I was quite fortunate that the school I went to had a bridge club, and there was a teacher who played, who's still a dear friend of mine. She was a decent standard player, in the local area. And I just got involved and I was hooked and addicted. And it kind of went from there. I started playing club bridge locally. I was playing 3-4 nights a week at the age of 16, 17, 18 in little kind of local clubs in the towns around where I lived. Turn up every week. I play with a pickup partner. It was not particularly great standard at all, but I was just playing. And I got to a reasonable level. I played England juniors and things like that. But I think even since then, the coaching and everything else has improved my game further because I've had more access to expert players. Through doing the coaching, I can, dial up, a lot of the best players in the country and say, will you do a session? But there's always something from those that I'm taking from it as well, because there's always like, I didn't think of that. I hadn't heard of that. So it's really just been a kind of a labor of love over the last 30 odd years. And here we are right now doing this interview, bizarrely enough.
Were there other books that you picked up as a kid that were foundational for you?
Yeah, in different ways. I mean, there was a point where I might have given it up, but the book that I happened to pick up then, fortunately, was Bridge My Way by Zia, which isn't necessarily a book you read for its educational value. But if you want to read a book that just goes, this is the most crazy world you're going to step into, this is the one. I mean, the funny thing is, the two books I've mentioned so far, I met Philip Alder when he was acting as the bulletin editor at a World Junior Championships in China. And obviously I played against Zia at the table. So, it all kind of went full circle and things like that. So in terms of inspiring me in the game, it was probably those two books. In terms of improving my game, I'm going to be a bit boring and predictable here. The two books that I probably learned most from were Reese on Play and The Expert Game by Reese, which I think is published as Master Play in the US. And Master Play, Reese Expert Game, is the one that I can go back to every few years and still get stuff from. When it comes to sort of the card play books, I think that people just get on with certain styles of author, and there's a number of good ones, and we've all looked through pretty much all of them, but there's just a couple that tend to resonate with you one way or the other.
What books do you recommend to the juniors that you work with?
That's quite difficult, actually, because I don't think that good books have been written for juniors yet. I did a bit of research, actually. If you take chess, you can find lots of books that have been written for children. If you take a look at bridge, there is no one single good text in the English language that has been written for junior bridge players. And I'm talking kind of like that 10 to 14-ish age group. So I coach the under 16s. So I'm looking for a book to be written in a certain way to capture their imagination. And the Reese stuff, love it, but it's very old fashioned. Language is very 1950s English. There is nothing that has really been written properly for young kids. It be that ACOL based, be it 2/1 based, and we coach 2/1 now to the juniors, not good old English ACOL. Nothing has been written for junior players. So I'm forced to start looking around for adult books that kind of work best. There's a couple of Kantar ones that are quite good, I think. The Kantar on defence, kind of the primer on it, and the similar equivalent for play. But I don't think anyone's written a good book for the juniors yet. So I'm kind of forced to look around a bit.
What would that look like? Like what would differentiate a good bridge book aimed at the tween market?
It's a good question. And again, I hark back to what I was like when I was their age. I'm not a particularly great chess player, but I remember being particularly enraptured by one particular junior chess book. I mean, it was just something I found in a school library at that kind of age. The presentation, the material, it's going to be a little bit more graphical than the density of the text. It's not necessarily going to go into every depth and every variation. The presentation is going to be quite important. It's going to be quite engaging without being patronizing. I think it's really just got to trigger the imagination as much as anything else at that age. Here are some of the basic ideas and the basic concepts. You really just got to, I guess, for a beginner, get them to a point where they can do some stuff reasonably functionally. Worry about being too perfect. I think it's the engagement, and it's difficult for me to say now because I am 30, 40 years past that age. But I think it's the kind of thing where you'd have to actually engage the children now to help you test the material to see whether it's going to work. And I think there is still a market for that as well. As much as we've now got so many more digital resources, we've got, Real Bridge and Bridge Winners and Bridge Master and Qbids and all that other kind of stuff that we'll talk about shortly. I, as a parent, don't want my kids on the screen all the time. But you give them a book and you're quite happy for them to be sitting reading a book or doing something like that. I've recently gone into my local primary school, so the school my children go to. I started teaching mini bridge to absolute beginners, aged kind of 9 to 11. And as soon as I mentioned the possibility of doing a little competition with a book as a prize, they flick their switch just like that. And they're just like, book, book, book. And if you think of the type of people who are likely to be bridge players, they're quite happy to have their noses in the book, quite a lot of them. And I think we're missing a trick here that sometimes the old school methods do still have a place to play in that. So yeah, I've got some ideas, but it's having the time to do all this stuff that's the big problem, or finding someone who'll take the project on for me.
Dan Corbell was telling me that for him it was Bridge in the Menagerie.
Right.
That he discovered as a kid, a teenager, that like really spoke to him. Do you think it's that sort of book that's more story based? Or do you think it's a learn to play bridge textbook that just uses better pedagogy for kids?
It could be either. I don't want to sort of limit the discussion to one particular choice. If that worked for Dan, then that's clearly what that worked for him. I suspect that the most general reach would probably go for the second example you give, the better pedagogy for kids. But every child is different, and every child will have a different key to their individual lock that you have to find. A different combination.
You know the book, The Card Turner?
So interestingly enough, yeah, I haven't read it, but one of my former juniors who was in my squad up to a few years ago, that was the book that engaged him. He found that randomly, picked it up and read it, and then decided that this was something he wanted to get involved with. And 2 years later, he was playing in the Junior European Championships and winning a silver medal. So it's, yeah, in a similar way to what Bridge My Way by Zia did for me, that kind of inspired him in the same way.
Maybe we need to like reach out to some publishers, like whoever publishes the chess books that work, say, hey, do you want to make a bridge book for kids? We'll provide the content. You provide the layout. We could do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one sort of particular way forward. I mean, I've looked at the possibility of taking existing material. I mean, there's plenty of instructional material out there that you just need to kind of re-edit and reformat into whatever. I mean, my personal preference on these at the moment, because I work quite heavily with the English Bridge Education to sort of work on developing some of their stuff, is to obviously go down that kind of route.
How did you get involved in the junior training program in the UK? It's in England, right? I should say.
Yeah,
England.
Yes, I mean, it used to be UK, but then the four nations devolved into England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So it is very much England now, has been since 2000. The answer is that I was still a junior international at the time. So I was coming towards the end of my sort of age eligibility. And I kind of recognized that one of the big problems that Bridge has is engaging with the younger people. And I had the one thing up my sleeve that made Bridge cool for young people. I played for England. And that immediately is like, what, you can play for England? Yeah, because I'm doing it. And I got involved locally. I knew a few school teachers at the local club where I played at the time. Obviously, through my national contacts, I knew a lot of the people involved with the staff, the coaches, and so on. And I gradually got involved. I've been doing the junior camps for the last 25 years here, and I got involved with the England junior squad, initially the under 21 age group. And I've been involved with the England junior squads now for over 20 years, and I've done every age category. I've done the under 21s. I had some success in that group working with Michael Byrne, who's one of the England Open players at the moment. And then I took over running the under 26s. We had some good results there. But I now work with the under 16s. I don't get to do as much as I'd like because I've got two young kids, and I kind of step back a bit, but kind of got sucked back in. But I think under 16s is the most exciting group by a long, 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 long way, because that's the group where I can have maximum impact on the players. That's where I take them from being total novices to being, good players. And under 16 bridge is the best thing that has happened to World Bridge in the last 20, 30, 40 years by an absolute landslide. And it's completely changed the way that we think about young players. When I was running the under 21s, or helping run the under 21s, the youngest people we'd get would be 15, 16. And, they'd be pretty ropey and, for a couple of years. And then kind of 17, 18, they'd start to become generally good players. Still, you get the odd younger exception, but they still really wouldn't start coming on till, a couple of years later. The under 16s has changed all that. Now I take players in aged 10, 11, and come the age of 13, they are starting to blossom. At 13 for me is often a magic age where mentally they develop the skills they need to play the game a bit better, but also they have the physical stamina to deal with a bit more intensity in the training and so on and so forth. And a lot of them tend to make the jump at that point. You get one or two who are a little bit earlier, but some who mostly around 13ish, I'd say.
13. It's like those old Jewish rabbis knew what they were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I did a bit of research into this, and there's models of mental development and certain skills, certain mental capabilities, particularly the ones around lateral thinking, tend to come into play around that age. And I think bridge is a harder game for kids to learn than chess, because chess is, you get a lot of younger chess prodigies. You get kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 who are doing incredible things who blow you and me out the water for fun. We haven't seen any really that young. We've had world and European medalists at the age of 10. The youngest world champion is American. The youngest medalist is actually one of my English players. She was 10 years and 3 months when she won a medal at the Europeans. Chess is kind of a game of complete information, and it's sort of purely spatial. Bridge is partnership game, which adds an extra dimension, of course. There's a lot of skills there that the younger people don't have. Incomplete information. It's imperfect as well. That you're always having to be creative to find solutions for stuff, and there's often a lateral answer to something. And I think that's really, really difficult for the younger players mostly to get hold of. But the impact we're now seeing on the game is that the under 16 category came into effect properly about 10 years ago. So the first major championship was the 2015 Europeans. They ran a test event in Istanbul in 2014. First full championship was 2015 Euros. So now those players are the ones at the very top end of the under 26 game, and those players are now starting to filter into the open game. And I think we've seen a shift even in the recent World Championships. We had Finn Kolesnik winning in his early 20s. I don't think that necessarily would have happened if the younger age categories hadn't been in play. And I think we're going to see more and more younger experts coming in because they've accumulated so much more experience at this younger age. So we're going to get an under 16 wave starting to come through and influence the major game. But we still really don't know a lot about how to train and how to develop the players at this age. There's still lots and lots of gains to be made in this area.
So other than just having this under 16 category, which I know didn't exist, how has the training program itself in England changed since you went through it to now that you're part of crafting it?
When I started off, we were obviously pre-internet, which has made a huge difference. So you'd be away doing your own thing. You'd come together for a number of training weekends during the year. You'd have to play in national events. You'd have to play in the national trials and so on and so forth to get selected for anything. And to a large extent, it remained fairly similar-ish. I mean, even the training methods were pretty consistent. Turn up, play a set of boards, discuss them, maybe do a few problems, that kind of thing. A little bit of partnership exercise. The thing that really changed everything was COVID, because we were forced to adapt, and it's made an enormous difference. So we use Real Bridge for all our training now. We now train the groups, once, twice a week usually. So the volume of contact we're getting with the players is so much higher than it was before. And you've got to be doing this now. You've absolutely got to be doing this if you're going to have a side that's going to be competitive. I'm quite fortunate that I actually sort of known the people who developed Real Bridge for a number of years. Graham, the programmer, was in the England Junior Squad at the same time as me. Shireen and Andy, I've known for years and years. And they were always coming to me and going, oh, we've got these new features for teachers and everything else. And so it's all kind of perfectly set up for the way that you want to do things, and you've got scope to play with things different ways. So I think that the volume of training has made a big difference. But the other online resources, obviously with BBO ViewGraph, people have much more access to what expert bridge looks like in a way that you probably only would ever get from an Eric Kokish match report 30 years ago. You can now see it for yourself right there, often with vocal commentary and the apps and the phone. So many people that you've interviewed have mentioned the Cubids. You even had the guys on a couple of weeks ago. As soon as I saw that, it was just like, yeah, this is it. Cubids just seemed to nail the format a bit better for the way I wanted to work. And I've bid tens of thousands of boards on there with my juniors, and it makes a difference. If I look at some of the success stories of recent under 16 bridge, Estonians who recently won the under 21s, absolutely hammering the boards on there all the time. Czechs who won a medal a few years ago, they were doing boards after boards after boards. You've got to be doing this stuff. It's just getting the volume, seeing the positions, understanding the game. And that's what's changed. The volume you're able to do with your partners and the convenience and the tools that are available to do it has changed the game enormously.
So when it comes to training kids this young, how much of it is formal instruction? This is a squeeze and these, you have to rectify the counter, and how much is just let them play?
I think you have to balance the two. I'm going to lean on my sports science bit here, and there are different types of skills, and how you train them also has an impact on how well they retain them. So I'm a big believer in gamification. What I try to do is, rather than be too formal, which also, if you've listened to me droning on for a number of minutes, they switch off very quickly. That's the first lesson I ever learned when I tried to stand up and deliver a lesson. I talked for too long and they all switched off. You've got to get their cards in their hands. You've got to get them playing. But also you've got to try and make it as game contextual as possible so that the skills they're learning kind of relate to where they're going, to what they're trying to do. So I try to set up sets of deals where they get to play them through. I try to make sure that they face the right problems in the right way, but they've also got live opponents against them and so on and so forth. So it feels like they're playing a match of some description, and then they can try and give it the requisite level of attention. I don't usually tell them in advance what the session is about, but try to let them attack the problems in their own way first. This is key. If you're going to be skill learning, then it's important that the player attempts to solve the problem first, and then also in the feedback phase afterwards, they attempt to then resolve the problem too with a bit of steering. And feedback is critical to this process. If you give too much of it and without any kind of reference to it, then that doesn't help the skill get embedded either. What I'm always doing is, instead of telling them the answer, I'm always giving them a series of questions. So every situation, imagine that you're trying to build up a picture of a hand, or say why you should have done this or why you should have done that. You and I, as experienced players, would have gone through a number of logical steps to get there. Now, individually, they may know the answer to each of those steps or be able to work out the answer to each of those steps, but they can't put together the whole sequence. So it's, okay, why should I have done this? Okay, what did West open? What didn't they open? What does that mean for their shape? Okay, what does that mean their partner's shape is? What was the opening lead? Okay, what does that mean about the rest of it? And you build up the sequence of things. You're not actually telling them what the answer is, but you're kind of guiding the path, and then they're answering it. And they trying to get them into that framework of doing that for themselves as they go through. It's a slow and laborious process, and you will go through it time and time and time and time and time again. And I'd like to say there's a magic bullet for, if you do this exercise or you do this particular training method, then you will magically teach them how to perform X and Y skill. But it's not like that. You've got to do it slowly. And so gradually I'm exposing them to different positions, different bits of theory, different bits of this, different bits of that, and trying to build up the picture. Some of those old-fashioned methods like books and Bridgemaster are still quite good because they still expose them to a variety of positions and theories and everything else. You've then got to try and bring it into the game context where they can try and understand how those kind of fit together within the other bits and pieces. So it's just a lot of time and a lot of patience to work through it all, I think.
How structured is the curriculum that you bring them through? Like, they have to learn all of these different things, right? They have to learn about counting. They have to learn about finessing. They have to learn about end plays, whatever. Do you have like, this is week 1, this is week 2, this is week 3 laid out? Or is it like, this week, let's work on end plays?
I think you have to look at it kind of holistically. And I also have the problem that I have players who I brought into my group who are very much less experienced than some of the ones I've had for 2 or 3 years. There's a big difference between my 10-year-olds and my 14, 15-year-olds. Big difference. But I still have to run a session that caters for all of them, that everyone can take something out of. I do have an overall idea of what I want to get to, but individually, what you kind of need to do is have sort of on a case-by-case basis, have a needs analysis for every student in your group. Okay, so David needs to do work on this, this, and this. And Sarah needs to work on this, that, and that. And then there'll be some overlaps, and you'll be able to do some one-to-one bits here and some one-to-one bits there. And within your frame of exercises, you'll have a few easier ones working through to some harder ones and some more complex positions. I do have an overall idea of what they need to do. And indeed, a number of years ago, I wrote the English Bridge Union's Junior Award Scheme, which looked at an overall teaching kind of award level framework to help other teachers say, okay, at this level of play, they need to be able to open a no trump and take a finesse. And at the very, very top level of play, they need to be able to, play a squeeze and, use a 2-suited overcourt or something like that. But for the group itself, you have to, I think, remain a little bit flexible and look at them on a case-by-case basis. What I'm really looking for are the ones who love it, the ones who are trying to work, because then they start demanding stuff from you instead, and that's a better way for it to be. The ones who are going to make it are the ones who are obsessed themselves, who just want to read everything, want to ask you everything, want to play in everything. And that's probably the real unifying thread around the players who've gone on to be really, really good. In fact, if you ask me at the start of a cycle who I think is going to be in the team, honestly, my answer is it's going to be the 4 to 6 players who work hardest in the next 12 months, because they're the ones that are going to improve the most.
So no one's ever come in and like, this is the next Mextroth. This is Madala.
Okay. I've been doing this for 20 odd years. The number of players who've truly, truly blown me away on first glance has been less than the fingers of one hand. And I've had almost 200 players come through. The ones who you thought, oh my God, this guy, this girl, whoever is absolutely something else. I've also seen players who've come in who you'd have thought were absolutely terrible, never going to do anything, go on to have really good careers in the game. And that's also quite a valuable lesson, because it teaches you not to write anyone off. And some of those players who came in fact, 2 of the best players I've ever seen first up quit the game before they ever got anywhere. The best players that none of you have ever seen, they're lost to the game. One went to play poker, another one just didn't want to play anymore, and that was it. So talent, I don't know. I think that the number of people that we get into the game of bridge is so small, and certainly the levels we're at in the juniors, that it's really who's made the most of what they've got so far. I don't think until we start getting hundreds of thousands or millions of people playing the game, we're going to have an idea who truly are the most talented, because the game of bridge draws from such a small talent base.
What do you think about the idea of the 10,000 hour rule?
I think there are some ideas in there that are relevant. The idea of progressive practice certainly is. And the 10,000 hour rule was something that certainly in the world of sports science, when I was doing my degree, was being hotly debated by a number of sort of skills experts and coaches and trainers and so on. I'm not a complete believer in it for a number of reasons. Certainly in bridge, I don't think it applies because I think, again, because the talent base is so small, I've seen a number of people go from zero to a very high standard in much, much less than the 10,000 hours. Much, much less. If there is some kind of thing in there, it's probably for activities where there's a great deal more competition. So if you were to take a look at football or soccer, as you'd say in the US, almost every child in many countries around the world ends up kicking a football. So the competitive pyramid is a lot harder. And so you consistently get driven on. But in bridge, I don't think that the base of the pyramid is wide enough to justify 10,000 hours yet.
Do you think we're just primitive and backwards as a sport?
In some ways, primitive and backwards is harsh. I just don't think we've tried to apply a lot of concepts fully yet. So there's, I think we're lacking in a lot of some of the psychology areas. I think we're lacking in some of the skill acquisition areas. I think data analysis is still in its infancy. Until we solve the problem of getting data capture in major events 100% reliable, then there's going to be a limit to what we can do there.
So let's say that the English Bridge Union came to you and they said, Alan, we want to really professionalize what we're doing with our open bridge team. And so we are going to pay you and we are going to pay the 3 partnerships on our team, kind of like the Dallas Aces did back in the day, that this is your full-time job, is to get better at bridge and win the Bermuda Bowl. Alan, you're in charge. You're the coach. You're designing the regimen. What does it look like?
Okay, so first thing I think you've got to do is understand what the problem is. So I'm going to put on my sports scientist hat here. I'm going to do a needs analysis. And the Bermuda Bowl is an interesting case study. The Europeans in some ways is easier because it's just a round robin. If you've got to get me through the Europeans first, then that's a separate job. Bermuda Bowls is a round robin, then a knockout. And the knockouts and the round robins are different skills. I'd also, with my 3 pairs, I'd kind of want to understand what their roles are on the team as well, because you do need to have different bits and pieces in place. You need to qualify in the top 8 to obviously get into the knockouts. And that means that you have to be able to score appropriately against the weak teams, because there are always 2 or 3 less experienced sides in the Bermuda Bowl from small countries, who've won their zonals.
More than 2 or 3 usually.
Yeah, I'm trying to be, but even if you look at the Bermuda Bowl, you can still go down to 20th place, and there's still some teams in there that have got handy players in there. This year, I think China, for example, had a bit of a down year, and they were down in like 16th, 17th, and no one's mistaking them for a weak bridge playing nation anymore. You've got to be able to kill the weak teams. You've got to be able to consistently get win after win after win against the intermediate teams, and you have to avoid in a round robin getting blitzed out by certainly the good teams, but pretty much anyone. And that means that you've got to have an understanding of your lineup and how they're going to play. And so for each individual pair, you'll need to understand what their role is. Are they going to be the killers? Are they going to be your solid, plus 0.2 on the butlers against everyone? But you do need a pair at the top end who is your horsepower. You've got to have an A-list pair at the top. I don't think you're going to win the Bermuda Bowl without an A-list pair somewhere. But each of those have got a role to play in the team, and that will come in with the NPC and everything else. I think you should have an identity as a pair about how you want to play. So all good sports teams have an identity. You know what their style is. And a lot of that is ingrained. So with the England juniors, for example, I know how I want them to play. I want them to play positive, aggressive bridge. If they've got a choice of actions, I want them to put their best foot forward. I don't want them to shrink back. I want them to be always in your face. And that should inform whoever you are. That should inform the way you want to play. If you're going to play that way, then you're going to have to accept that sometimes you're not going to go for the best technical line. You're just going to take the swings and roundabouts and be done with it. But you should have an idea of how you want to play as a pair and as a team, and that will feed into everything as well. I'd also want to look at the schedule of the training itself. And I think there's another area here where bridge hasn't, or the mind sports are probably well behind. So if you look at physical sports, particularly endurance sports, there's a training theory called periodization. And what that does is it looks at your training load against time with respect to all the events you're going to play in. And if you're a marathon runner, for example, you will, in the 2 weeks before you do your target event, wind down your training load so that you're physically fresh but not detrained. And I think people haven't really looked at that in the same way or planned it properly in the same way in the mind sport. So you might do a high training load, over a period, but you'll taper down in the week or two before an event to be sort of mentally fresh but still sharp from the training before the detraining effect kicks in from having not trained for too long. So I'd be looking at the training we'd want to do in terms of the number of hours and the timing of those hours. I'd also be looking at suitable warm-up events. So if I was looking at Bermuda Bowl, I'd be looking at something where I had a round robin. So in England, clearly we're going to have the Premier League, or there may be something abroad we could look at. If you're looking at a knockout, if I'm in Europe, then maybe something like the Big Teams Championship in Sweden, where you get a lot of foreigners going in. That's a big knockout event where you're going to get high quality opposition and you're going to be able to play long knockout matches. US Nationals is another case in point. If you were able to play in the Vanderbilt or Spingold, for example, those kind of events. So you want to be playing the type of bridge that you will be playing in the main event. So Swiss teams, BAM. I know that, the Rising is an amazing event, but is it going to win you the Bermuda Bowl? No, because it's a different form of scoring, everything else. If you're going to just aim purely for the Bermuda Bowl, this is what you can do. If you're looking at the World Pairs Final, then you'd be looking at playing as many high quality match point events as possible, because the tactics and the bidding style is going to be slightly different to optimize on that. Then you'd be looking at the type of training and ratio of training to analysis that you're going to do as well. So you've got to be looking at analysis and feedback. You've got to have that in the right kind of ratio to gain most from the bridge you've played. I'd be trying to collate stats on what all the pairs were doing. Recording boards, understanding where the plus points of system are, where the weak points of system are, and so on and so forth. Another area I think people really haven't taken a look at yet is looking at matchups. If you look at cricket or baseball, for example, you'll know that, if you're certain pitchers or bowlers work better against certain batters, and so you're always looking for positive matchups. So if you've got enough data, then you'd be looking at, okay, which of our pairs is going to work best against others? It's a bit more difficult in bridge because we've got the blind lineups. But if you actually look at a lot of the lineups that get submitted into World Championships, there are some teams you can set your clock by which pairs are going to play which sets and in which seats. I'm not going to say who, because they might be watching, and
that might start to change if people are optimizing better.
Yeah, but if you, for example, felt that there was a weaker pair or a sponsor that you wanted to get after, then if you knew that they always sat east-west in set 2 or something, then you might try and put a pair in who was aggressive. And if you knew they always sat east, then you might try and put your individual pairs in different places because they've got different tendencies. And I'd be, with the data collection as well, I'd be looking at, some of the truisms we have in bridge. Do these still hold, or are there other things that we've missed, or so on and so forth? So I think there's lots of areas to gain there. And another one I'd look at in the tournaments themselves is how you manage the team. Whilst you might actually have an idea of the roles of the players, there's a famous saying that a plan never survives first contact with the enemy. You've got to still be flexible enough to deal with that. And I think that people get either into a routine of just rotating the pairs, I'm going to play morning and afternoon, and somebody else is going to play the two edges, and someone else is going to play sets 2 and 3 on a day. Or, if they have a good set, they always keep the team, and if they have a bad set, they always change the lineup. I think you need to look at the mental energy of the team very, very differently, and each pair and individual differently. Looking at a lot of the recent matches in the juniors and in the Bermuda Bowl, there were a lot of matches where one side would have a big set or a big part of a set and gain 50, 60, 70, and it would swing back the other way. And I think there's a big danger that people miss, that, you have the big set, but then your mental intensity drops off. Have your players retain that intensity, or do you need to actually change the lineup to bring in someone fresh to keep the momentum going? Equally, when you lose, are your pairs out for the count? Do they need to just walk away, or have actually got the bit between their teeth? Are they going to be better put back in to try and they're in the right place to fix the damage that has happened? So I think people don't necessarily look at the mental energy of their teams that well when they're doing their NPCing during the tournaments as well. So I think there's lots of different areas where you could, I don't know if you could put a number on it, but there are lots of areas where I think you could potentially gain that people haven't really looked at yet.
What about physical fitness?
So physical fitness is interesting, and I think physical fitness is useful up to a point, but I prefer to talk about functional fitness. So functional fitness is more important. I mean, you've got to be in some basic level of good health, but is cycling 100 miles going to necessarily make you absolutely better at concentrating for 8 hours a day? Well, it'll help you with your basic level of fitness, but the act of being a good bridge player is physically draining in another way. So I think part of it is you have to look after yourself so that haven't got any kind of underlying conditions. You've got a basic level of good fitness, but otherwise, realistically, there's no better way of training for the mental demands of a bridge tournament than playing a bridge tournament. And I'm saying this as someone who enjoys going out and has ridden 100 miles on a bike a few times. So I think there may be different aspects to it. I think from a physical standpoint, maybe not. But if you engage in other competitive activity, particularly stuff that is strenuous, I think it can help you in a mental way. So if, for example, you do something that does put a particular strain on you, if you've got the mental strength to push through when you're feeling, physically drained and everything else from exercise, that can help you at the table when you're feeling tired there. But from a purely physical standpoint, I'm not convinced that beyond a certain point that it makes a huge difference.
There is a point, right? Like if someone's just sitting on the couch.
Well, yeah, that's not going to be good. No.
Right.
So I think you need to be, as I said, I think you need to have a reasonable level of basic fitness, but I don't think you need to be a superhuman athlete.
Right. But
So
I think if I were the coach, I would be saying, all right, well, here's our diet and we're going to the gym a couple times a week. Nothing crazy, but
exactly.
just like I want you healthy.
Yeah. And so sleep is in that, recovery is in that, avoiding abusing substances in that, just basic good healthy eating without being too puritanical about the whole thing.
Yeah. What about alcohol at a tournament? Do you have any feelings on that?
I would generally say no. And I mean, when I've been I'm not actually played in a major at open level, but when I've been at a major junior, I never drink personally, and that's an example thing. I think I prefer my team avoided it. Certainly anything more than just a single social drink is a bit of a danger. I think you have to read the situation. If it happens kind of like more than once, you'd avoid it. I mean, most players just say we're going to not do it and it's not a problem. I think my way around this is culture. For me, the answer is that the whole team has to buy into how you are going to approach it. So it's quite simple. You've got an objective, win the Bermuda Bowl. Okay, if we're all going to buy into this, we're all in it together, we're all going to do the same things. You're then all basically policing each other. And that's the way I've always gone about it with certainly my older teams. My under 16s, the captain, the coach sets the agenda. You're going to behave yourself, you can be in bed. If you've got adults, they've got to be able to self-police a certain extent. And so this is where the culture bit comes in. And I'm also not a big believer in the idea that a team absolutely has to like each other. Everyone has to like each other. Some of the best sports teams absolutely hated each other's guts. But why did they win? Because they were all focused on the same goal. They were all bought into the challenge of winning that. I mean, you may have a better time socially with people you like, but actually the academic science says it's quite a weak predictor of success. Task cohesion is a far bigger predictor of success than social cohesion.
So why hasn't anyone done this? I feel like in other sports, physical sports especially, like in baseball here in the States, we had this like revolution with Bill James coming along and studying the statistics, and
the
changed the
moneyballing,
game. Yeah, the Moneyball thing. And a chess grandmaster is studying old games for hours and hours a day. And if you talk to Magnus Carlsen, he talks about getting into shape before the world championships and things like that.
I think one of the problems is that the data collection has been imperfect. I looked at this briefly as well. Human collection is obviously very imperfect. I don't know if you've ever done any view graph operating. I've done a little bit. But you actually need to be a reasonable standard player to be a half decent operator, because play tends to go in spurts. That there'll be lots of thinking and then 2 or 3 tricks will happen very, very quickly. But if you're a half decent player, you'll be able to anticipate what the likely line of play is, and then also you'll be able to store the tricks as they happen. But view graph data collection has been poor, both from an operator standpoint and also because internet technology would fall down every now and again and things would break. They did try a number of years ago with the optical collection, It didn't work properly then. They were doing an experiment in Lille. I know that Gonzalo Godet has been working on the problem, but he's still only at 94%. I did have a brief chat about him. I work for a sensors company. I'm not a full-time bridge pro, just to understand what he'd been up to. But I think until we get to 100% data collection, it's going to be difficult. The interesting thing is looking at the Lovebridge stats. Lovebridge have been doing a number of the major championships where they've been using the tablets. I think you use the Lovebridge system in the US trials.
Yeah, and going through that view graph compared to the BBO view graph is just night and day.
Yeah, but even then they pull out some elementary stats of, imps on different contracts and things like that. And there are a few little bits and pieces you can take a look at. Even some of the anti-cheating software like Edgar or Nicholas Hammond's stuff was pulling out elementary stats on leads, successes, and things like this. The problem with bridges, it's very subjective in many, many areas. So if you were to take a look at things like an error count, who's to judge what an error is? Now, I know that Eric Kokish used to do this in some of the old championship reports, but it's very, very difficult if you're watching live to say, oh, that's definitely an error, because you'll know from being at the table there's so much vibe and information that you can't possibly pick up on just a raw data collect. People get their instincts of, it was just a slight something going on over there and that's going to change everything. Data collection is the big one. Then what kind of metrics you'd be able to pull out of it is another issue, and there's a whole load of work to be done on that as to what's useful, what's not useful, what's relevant, what's not relevant. And chess is also a lot different. Everything starts from the same base, so it's quite easy to go, okay, what games began with this combination of 3 or 4 moves, and immediately your trees come down. In bridge, again, your hands are so different. You're kind of working on a bidding tree and then having to cross combine all that kind of stuff. And with everyone playing different systems as well, a Polish club is different from a precision club, is different from a 2-card club, is different from an Akol natural club, is different from a, you get the idea here that it's quite tricky. And I've got a database, but you still have to manually work through quite a lot of stuff to get to something that resembles a conclusion. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
Yeah, but even without the data analysis, it seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of what you were talking about in terms of the coaching, like matchups. And other than like Nick Nickel hiring Eric Kokish back in the day or the Dallas Aces, I can't really think of anyone who has done this, who has had a diet and exercise routine for the team, who has done scouting on other teams, who, has in some like real systematic way worked on making the team better. And, these sponsors have enough money that they could hire someone like you, right?
Well, I'm not necessarily the person with the right skills. I'm maybe just got some of the ideas, but yeah.
Yeah, they could hire a Kokish.
The problem is that there are very few Kokish types out there. The people who dedicate themselves to doing that aspect. In England, I can think of just 2 or 3 who would be good enough at open standard to do that kind of stuff in terms of system freaks.
If there were a market, right? If people were paying for that position, I think there would be more of them, right? I mean, can you imagine the England football team just being like, okay, well, we'll see you guys at the World Cup.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And full well that, in all those major events, if you take the England football team, they come to a penalty shootout at the end of the game. The goalkeeper has the notes of the statistical likelihood of which way each of the opposition footballers are going to take a penalty.
Yeah, of course.
And, it's the same with, cricket players and everything else. They understand who this particular batsman doesn't do well against fast bowling. This one is terrible against this type of spinner. And you try and arrange that kind of matchup. I don't think we've got necessarily the data yet. That this particular player is terrible against Polish clubs, so we've got a pair that does that. So we want to try and put them in against it. Or this particular player, but we'll try and randomize, or we'll go solid, or whatever else. How you try and take advantage of that's another question. But I think there are things. I mean, I guess so many of the top players now know each other from playing in, the big events in Europe and US and so on, that they've got a feel for who they go well against and who they haven't, but how much they actually put into saying, well, we're going to try and deliberately target, this pair or that pair. I don't know.
Do you think that when and if we fix the data collection problem, there's going to be like a revolution?
Might be a very slow inflation. I think it'll take time to build up enough data because at the moment we haven't got it.
Right.
And
Right.
also because there'll be, relatively speaking, there'll be, only a few events that will be doing that kind of collect. And that doesn't necessarily give you a big enough data set across enough things. I mean, maybe if the technology becomes at a point where you could do it at lots of different levels, then you'll get that. But just across a world championship where you've only got 3, 4, 500 boards played across the entire duration of the championships, it's going to be difficult. 500 boards is nothing in the world of
It's going to take
bridge.
decades. Yeah.
So you're going to need things like all the major US championships to do it. And we've already moaned enough on the internet forums about how the ACBL is so far behind on technology compared to the rest of the world and so on and so forth. And that data then also needs to be available for everyone to pick up and share. Does a tournament in Australia or China or wherever also share all its data, and you've got to hoover it all up and turn it into a database? Yeah, I think it'd be a slow thing rather than a revolution. I suspect the data would be more useful for self-analysis than opponents, than getting really detailed knowledge of opponents.
In terms of individual work on one's own game,
Yeah.
do you think that bridge players are leaving something on the table? Like, I don't feel like top class bridge players work as hard as top class chess players or top class physical athletes.
I don't think they do. I used to do a bit of distance running and cycling and stuff, and used to hang out with triathletes and things. And the amount of time and hours they'd put into training leaves bridge players in the total dust. It really, really does. And, it's a total commitment to a lifestyle. If you're training for an Ironman triathlon, there's no two ways about it. And before I sort of get too heavy on bridge players, I'm going to say I don't know the full answer, because whilst I count some of the top players in the country amongst my friends, I don't know what they're doing day in, day out in terms of that. And anything I say could be doing them a big disservice. But my impression is that they probably don't do it anywhere near as much as, proper professional physical athletes do, for example.
And do you think it would make a difference? Like, do you think if some of the guys on the England Open team, let's say, spent 20, 30 hours a week working on their game, whatever that meant, reading, watching ViewGraph, playing Bridge Master, whatever, like, do you think over the course of time you would see enough return on that time investment?
I don't know, because I don't know exactly what they're doing at the moment, what kind of a step that would make. I'll stand by my view that I think there are things they could do to use their time better and more smart. I'm going to flip it back to the juniors again. I'm going to raise one of my favorite examples of where it absolutely has worked, and it definitely works in the junior game. I'm going to go for the Estonians, and there was an article on Bridge Winners where a couple of months ago that's worth just looking up, where one of the guys who was involved with the team talked about the regime they did, number of balls per week, piling in the hours. And with respect to Estonia, they are a small country, few million people, all the rest of it. I've been watching their progression over the last few years, and they were competitive under 16 levels, started winning medals. They won pairs medals, they won teams medals at under 21s, and now they've won the big one. They've won the world championship. So there is certainly in the junior level examples of where just sheer brute hard work has managed to do that. I'm not saying that the players don't have any ability. Clearly, they've got some ability. Are they the most talented players ever? I don't know, because I've not met them personally. But if you're looking at a group that has just taken 4, 6 players who can play the game, and they've taken those 6 players and taken them to win a world championship, from such a small sample size, it's clearly saying that hard work, at least at junior level, will get you a long, long way to being a world champion, if nothing else. And if we look at the size of the English junior program in comparison, we're not much bigger. I'm literally picking up almost the only under 16s who play the bridge in the country. I live in a village of a few thousand people. My local village junior soccer team has comfortably more players in it than I have in my England junior bridge squad. So at this particular point in time, I think hard work will get you a long way, just because the talent pools are so small.
Yeah, I mean, part of my idea this year was to see like what that could look like, like to put that sort of personal effort in and partnership effort in, like to try to professionalize it. And I haven't met my goals in terms of like the hours spent. because, I'm working and I'm teaching and it's hard work. But it seems to me that, for professionals, this is their job and they're competitive people. I would think that they would want that edge. I've talked to a lot of very good players this year for the podcast, and I haven't talked to anyone who is working like Magnus Carlsen is. At least my sense of what Magnus Carlsen does.
Do you feel that you've improved as a player even without doing the amount that you thought you were going to do?
Yeah, for sure.
So
For sure.
I followed you in the USBFs, and you got knocked out, but it was a close-ish match.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone back through those boards and like we had it on our racket. This is the number 2 seed, and we could have beaten them. Yeah, I felt pretty good, and I wasn't even playing with Greg in that one. I was playing with a different partner. And then we played in the spin gold, and we had an upset, and then we could have won the next match, but Greg was in the hospital. So like, yeah, I feel like both individually and as a partnership, I've improved without a doubt. And I started pretty good, not world class, but pretty good. So it can make a difference. I'm living proof of that.
No, I think if you look through a lot of the World and European Championships type stuff, there are so many imps that go flying all over the place. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to me as well, looking at all the results, is there are maybe a small handful of players who maybe stand out, but the general depth below that is a lot greater than it ever was. If you take a look at England, for example, we've had a number of quarterfinal, for example, performances in the Bermuda Bowl or equivalent over the last 10, 15 years, but they've all come with very different lineups. So there's a lot of players who are kind of at that international class without being quite the exceptional standard. If you look at things like the Rosenblum, the World Open Teams Championship, there are loads and loads of players from America, from Holland, from Poland, from whatever, and there's always 1 or 2 teams of players who aren't the regulars on their international teams and make it into the late stages, because there are a lot of really good players in a way they probably weren't 20, 30, whatever years ago, but because of the amount of online resource and other things, they're able to get to quite a decent standard. But maybe, as you say, that the professional players have an opportunity to push the bar out further, to make it harder and to stand out more and more and more. I think it is a lot harder to win these events than it probably was all that time ago. And if you put, the best team in the world in, 30 years ago, you'd say they've got 50-50 chance of winning. Now it's down at 10-20% chance of winning because of the depth that's there at this international or near international class.
What do you think separates someone like you or me from, the open team, the international level players?
I can answer this one because I ended up being coach to the England Open team in Lille in 2012. So I was there with Forrester, I was there with Robson, I was there with David Gold. Those are the big
World
3
class
names.
players,
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Top notch. And so the bit I wish I'd had a tape recorder for was the discussions around dinner afterwards. Now, to be fair, Lille didn't go well, and we've all been in events where for whatever reason it just didn't happen. But what was really fascinating, apart from the individual dynamics between the players themselves, the sort of the social ranking between the team, was the post-mortems were incredible. And the difference for me was, and I've seen it all the way through. So when I'm coaching the juniors, it's noticeable how much we defend on inference, or we pick up on inference, like this has happened, that's happened, therefore this, and this, so the hand must be like that. It actually solves a lot of the counting problems. You know why something's happened, so therefore the hand probably looks like that. And you're doing it without realizing it. What the really good players do is they take that to the nth degree. So listening to Forrester and Robson and Gold, that they pick up on other little extra inferences that I hadn't considered and stuff like that. So that's one area where they are well ahead in terms of reading the game, reading the hand. You're always comfortable in a match when you know what's going on. If you know what's going on, you've got read on the table, then you're okay. But these guys would see hands on another level to me. The other thing that the pros have got is, and the really top ones, is because of all their experience of positions in the auction and in play and stuff like that, it's just the vast array of bidding agreements and understandings that they've become exposed to that, if you haven't played that much and you haven't been in that company and you haven't had the chance to discuss and haven't had a chance to chat, then if you're in a good level partnership, you've got defenses to most stuff. You understand your basic principles. You can get by, but there's always going to be this degree of uncertainty. You talk to one of the experts and they get into one of these niche positions. It's like, yeah, well, in this position we do this, this, and this, and it's kind of understood. So there's just an extra level of system understanding as well that solves them a lot of the grey questions. Some of the times it doesn't matter, but on another date that's going to be 10 imps out right there because they had the agreement and you didn't. So I'd say it's just the better reading of the hand from an overall perspective, and it's that extra level of detailing in their understandings of certain positions that they've got through experience and discussion and so on and so forth. And I think this is actually critical to the player development bit. I think reading and self-teaching and so on goes so far, but I think the key to generating top class open players is exposing your best juniors to your experts as often as possible, playing with them, playing against them, talking with them. It's the final step. So if you wanted to make the next step, you should be hanging around with all the New York experts all the time, just discussing, understanding, gaining that extra degree of knowledge that you don't have. And I think the countries that have done really well in open players now are the ones who've got that connection. And the Dutch have converted so many of their young juniors into their current open and the women's teams. The Poles have done exactly the same thing. The French have done a lot of that. The Swedes have got a lot of young internationals within their team because they're all kind of based around Stockholm and playing with each other all the time. And I think that's something that England haven't done well in comparison. And so your juniors are critical because those are your future open players. Almost certainly. It's so rare to find an open player who didn't play junior bridge at some point in time. And so you can coach and teach them and they can self-learn up to a point, but the final step is that contact with your absolutely elite players who are sharing that kind of higher level inferential knowledge and level of detail that they don't get from just the books and the basic training and self-learning.
One of the other answers I've gotten to that question a lot is focus and consistency. Does that ring true to you as well?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly as you work through the levels, the consistency comes in. Juniors are tremendously erratic. The good players do make fewer mistakes in certainly routine, but often, there's the semi-technical spots and they've got a better chance of solving the really, really complex stuff. Yeah, consistency is definitely in there too. The ability to just pile out 40 odd boards. Some of that, of course, is down to having the better functional fitness as well. So if you're used to playing a 2-week event, then you're going to have the stamina to do that, mental stamina to do that at the end.
So how can bridge appeal to a younger crowd?
So I've mentioned a few times that we have small player bases, both, all over the world. It's relatively speaking to other activities. And I don't think the game is the problem. So my experience from bringing bridge to going into my local school, for example, there were a load of kids there who'd never heard of the game before, and I was teaching them mini bridge, and I didn't get dropouts. I had them turning up week after week after week. It's not the game itself, and I wouldn't worry about the complexity of the game either. In fact, actually, that's a selling point because you don't solve it straight away. It gradually unfurls its beauty and its complexity to you as you learn more and more and more. Kids love the complexity, so we shouldn't be trying to dumb the game down. The answer is we've got to make it more accessible. And we do have painfully small numbers playing the game all over the world. But teaching children of all ages is hard. Your average bridge club is not the most exciting place for a young child to go. And it's happening at times when they can't realistically play. What 10 or 11-year-old is going to be allowed to stay up to 11 o'clock at night on a school night? It's not going to happen, is it? So we've got a problem with, it's not in the culture. It's difficult to give them access and so on and so that if they're not getting the opportunity to play consistently and learn consistently, they won't do it. They love the game. They love the social aspect. Bridge tends to attract its own crowd, and that's not a bad thing. It really isn't. But quite simply, it's just a lot of really, really hard work from a lot of people to build up the player base. And all over the world, there's a handful of people doing great stuff, but honestly, it requires the entire bridge community to commit to it properly, to really make an effort to join in local initiatives and other things to try and build up the mass build up the player base and so on. The kids love playing. Just give them every opportunity to get involved, and gradually you might have a chance, because the time we should have done this is years and years and years ago, when bridge did have cultural currency. It's shrunk so much. But if you do look at things like chess, which had the Queen's Gambit, had Carlson making it sexy appear in adverts and stuff like that. There's even an article in today's Guardian newspaper about how, a pop-up chess cafe in London is oversubscribed because, and that, it's cool food and great music and all that kind of stuff going on while they're playing pickup games. We're starting from not even square one. We're starting from square minus 100. If we're going to make bridge appeal to a younger crowd, we just have to make it accessible and share the game and just embrace what young people are going to bring to it. It's as simple as that.
I've also found that tapping into their natural competitiveness, that
Yeah.
I think the best way to establish a bridge club at Oxford is to have one at Cambridge and create that competition.
As soon as I told my school kids that I was going to try and fix up mini bridge matches for them against another school, they were like, we so want to do this. When I was a junior playing at school, the only thing that mattered was beating the school in the next town. That was my goal. Then it was, okay, can I win the national schools championship? Oh God, you can play for England. I want to do that. The schools cup was my, when I was 18, it was everything I wanted in terms of bridge. It mattered. So yes, competitive stuff, absolutely. And that's what I mean about making it accessible, more competitions, the ability to get involved. The social aspect comes along with that as well, because they all meet friends who've got a similar shared interest. And it doesn't matter what activity you do, pretty much all people want to meet people who love the same thing as them, because it gives them an instant connection. But yes, the competitiveness, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that can snowball, that, once there's a competition there and people see it and, more schools want to get involved. I mean, that's what I would like to see happen.
Absolutely. And actually, adults are one of the biggest hindrances to this, because instantly their reaction is, well, we can't do that. It might be a bit of a step too far. Nonsense. Never, ever, ever be afraid on behalf of the kids. I've learned to put my complete trust in the kids. With the England juniors, with the 16s, as soon as they come into the squad, I'm trying to find ways to throw them into, okay, here's a free online real bridge pairs. You're going to play against Thailand and Australia. And I want as many of you playing this event as physically possible. And this actually led me to one of my disappointing things. So last year, the European Bridge League set up an online zonal for all the different age groups. It was free entry. Now, I know that flying to a world championships on the other side of the world is an incredibly costly exercise, but this should be a no-brainer. If your national association can't even field a team in a free event, what are you doing? You've got to have a serious look at yourself and what you're trying to do. And I would implore the WBF and the EBL to be much sort of firmer on all the various member nations. You've really got to support this stuff. This is important. And as I said, these are your future international players. You're actually harming your own open aspirations if you're not doing this. I've taken kids from literally turning their first card all the way to a world championship. I know what it looks like. And all of these things, your schools events, your local national events, your international events, they're all stepping stones. And we've got to create as much of this as possible. And people have to buy in and commit properly, and not just leave it to the same small handful of people around the world who are doing their own wonderful little things, but ultimately can't scale up on their own. So for me, I just want to try and expose the game to as many kids as possible of whatever backgrounds, especially, those who wouldn't otherwise be expected to see it. Because if your parents are wealthy, you get to travel the world, you get to do all this stuff. I would love to take, kids who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do this. Imagine you get to take them to America for a world championship or something that they wouldn't have had the chance to do before. That is a life-changing experience. Immediately, your perspective of the world goes from this to this. And, you start thinking differently, not just about bridge, but also every other aspect of your life. If you can do that in bridge, why can't you do it in anything else? Why shouldn't you expect to be doing those things as well? So it's actually a genuine chance for people to get an experience they wouldn't otherwise get. And I'd really love to be able to share that with other people who wouldn't otherwise get the chance to do it.
That seems like a good place for us to end. Alan, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
No, thank you so much for having me, Adam.